Fisher. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability, and I'm very, very excited. I hardly ever say that, really, but I'm very excited for a lot of different reasons. First of all, we've got such a fantastic panel. This panel is going to expand, I think, our understanding of what sustainability means. We have our special guest, Mary Armstrong from the Boeing Corporation, who's really going to talk about organizational sustainability and the dramatic steps forward that Boeing has taken under her direction in the last 5 years. And there's a lot of important lessons there for us. And I'm going to quickly introduce Steve Osborne, who's going to introduce appropriately. I think he should be the one that introduces Mary to this on this grand stage. But I first wanted to kind of tell a quick story, particularly for the students. You know, I was just in California, as many of you know, to an academic conference, and most of my friends from my PhD days are out in California. And I have really three friends, colleagues of mine, that have devoted their entire lives and educational careers to these issues. Two of them have started their own business. One started their own nonprofit, another one started their own for-profit business in and around these ideas of sustainability. And then I have a third who's just graduating, has gone back to law school and wants to do environmental stuff as he just graduated. The two that are in the business side want to quit. They're disenchanted. They really don't understand how they fit anymore. And this is, I think, an important step to stop to recognize what's really happening out there with certain people and the way people are feeling about sustainability, environmental issues. If they're lost, then we're doing something wrong, because they really are the front line. I don't know where that front line would be, but I know when you're talking about people that have devoted their lives, particularly those that have gone on another 6 years to get a PhD, and they've had the courage, the ingenuity, the creativity to get out and start their own business and nonprofit, and they're sitting across the table from you telling you, you know, I'm done, I'm spent, because they just don't know how to create this change anymore. There isn't enough people out there that really understand what I'm trying to do. And I told them the answer lies in collaboration and in social capital and in support networks. They don't have them. They feel like they're alone. And so why I'm really excited about this panel is because I think, and the administration being here and Steve even introducing Mary, I think it represents a very, very important step forward where we're building that collaborative network that allows us to then start seeing change and how change operates. And then we can start to take that next step forward. And I don't think we can take the next step forward. I think we'll end up in the same boat that my friends are in, wondering how is it that we do this after 2 or 3 years. But by seeing other examples, by working with other people, particularly in the community, we begin to understand how we ourselves can change internally and how we organizationally can shift to be able to move this and become part of the solution. So that's why I'm really excited about this, and particularly to have my applied sustainability students here to be able to participate and observe and listen to everything that's being said. The format is going to be a little bit different here today before I introduce Steve. We are going to, Steve's going to introduce Mary. She's going to do about 20 minutes to show what she's done at Boeing. It's very impressive. And then we'll take about 5 minutes for a self-introduction for each panelist, talk about what they do, how it relates to Charleston, and then we'll follow that up with some questions where I'll moderate the panel. What I want from you guys, if you have any questions, we have some people that will walk around with note cards, write your answers on your questions on a note card, and then I will bring them up in the last 15 to 20 minutes of the session. So with that said, I'd like to introduce my boss, the Executive Vice President of Business Affairs here at the College of Charleston, Steve Osborne.
Thank you, Brian. It's my pleasure to welcome all of our panelists here today. We appreciate you all being with us. It's also my pleasure to introduce Mary Armstrong, who is a part of our panel this morning. She's a very special guest with us. She's been on campus since Monday night. She's been meeting with numerous individuals on campus. She's been sharing her professional experiences with all of us and learning all about the College of Charleston, and I think it's been a rewarding experience for all of us. Mary very recently retired as the Vice President of Environment, Health, and Safety for the Boeing Company, the world's largest aerospace company. Under Mary's leadership, beginning in May 2007, Boeing established and is on track to meet aggressive environmental performance targets for 25% improvements in energy efficiency, greenhouse gas emissions intensity, hazardous waste generation, water consumption, and recycling rates, all during 2012. Additionally, the company completed a major goal by certifying all of its major manufacturing facilities to the globally recognized ISO 14001 environmental standard and has been named a top performing industrial company in the 2009, 2010, 2011 Carbon Disclosure Leadership Index, which ranks corporations for transparency around reporting climate change risk and actions to improve environmental performance. Under her leadership, Boeing has established a target to improve workplace safety by 25% between 2009 and 2013. The company is on track to meet this target. Prior to this position, Mary was president of the Boeing Shared Services Group, responsible for leading a 10,000-person business unit that provides cost-effective services across Boeing's global enterprise. She was named to that assignment in December 2004. Previously, Mary served as Vice President and General Manager of Commercial Airplanes Fabrication Division, composed of 12 operating sites throughout the world. Here she was responsible for leading component engineering and manufacturing facilities that supply parts, tools, and assemblies for the Boeing commercial airplanes and for Boeing defense, safety, and security. Her earlier leadership assignments included serving as Vice President and General Manager of the Boeing Aircraft Systems and Interiors Division and Vice President of Boeing's Facility Services for the Puget Sound area and Wichita, Kansas. Mary joined the company in 1984 as a process engineer for manufacturing research and development. Prior to joining Boeing, she worked as a process engineer for the Chevron Research Company. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from the University of Washington in Seattle and a Master's of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from the University of Rochester in New York. The American Society of Safety Engineers in 2011 added Mary to its list of the top 100 women worldwide who have made significant contributions to the EHS field. In 2011, Mary was named by the Financial Times as one of the top 50 women in the wings of business leadership globally. Mary currently serves on the Board of Governors for Argonne National Laboratory and the University of Washington Chemical Engineering Advisory Council. She has served on the Board of Directors for Island Wood, the Board of Directors for the World Environment Center, the Nature Conservancy's International Leadership Council, Puget Sound Blood Center Board of Directors, and the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium Board of Directors. Mary and her husband have 5 sons, and together they enjoy boating and other outdoor activities. Last night at dinner, I learned she's a Detroit Tigers fan, which makes her very special. Please join me in welcoming Mary Armstrong.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I've been here since Monday, and just been treated to a fabulous review of the College of Charleston and the wonderful plantation out at Dixie. It's an amazing place, and I can tell you that you should all feel very fortunate to be part of this institution. I'm going to spend 15 or 20 minutes just talking. I'm going to show you charts. I hope that's okay. I'm going to put my watch up here so that we can make sure that we're on time, and talk about what we've done at Boeing in the aerospace. So how does this notion of sustainability translate itself into the business of aerospace? Sound okay? Okay? All right. Now, I'm used to not clicking this myself, but let's see if I can do this right. All right. So it really, in short order, why would a company like Boeing be interested in sustainability for the environment? It's pretty simple. Companies are successful when they produce products that their customers want, and that they do that in a manner that the communities that they work in and are part of, and that their employees and employees can be proud of. So the world is demanding more environmentally progressive products from us. Our CEO went around the world when he first got to the Boeing Company about 6.5 years ago. And the customers around the world, some of which are governments, because we sell a lot of our products directly to government-owned airlines. Some of them are private companies, but particularly in Europe. He heard we need better fuel efficiency. We need a sustainable growth path for aviation such that we can reduce our environmental footprint. And of course, specifically at that time, things haven't changed much. It's about greenhouse gas and CO2 emissions and capping those. So he came back and said, hey, we need to elevate, the business is driven by these things. We need to elevate the environment into our overall company strategy. So that's where this journey for me started in 2007. So we have a very simple strategy. Continuously reduce our environmental footprint across our value chain. So we depict that. Now we've matured. This used to be in a linear view. So it starts with our suppliers, because after all, they are making products that go into our airplanes. And let's see, any guesses about how many parts might end up in a 747? Let's use the 787. That's a little more personal here. How many parts do you think go into a 787?
3 million.
Good guess. Good guess. Anywhere between 4 and 6 million. So we got to put all those things together, and they do it on our behalf, and then fly that airplane. And the first one is going to come out of the Charleston, North Charleston site, the third week of April, and it's going to go to Air India. So big supply chain impact, right? It includes our 4 walls, or our internal operations. It certainly includes, and in fact, our single largest impact around the world by Boeing products is our products during their useful life as operated by our customers. And I'll get into that later. And then of course, what happens after the airplane's not usable and goes to the airplane cemetery. So now we depict this in a circular pattern, because this notion of cradle to cradle is really where we're headed long term. So let's talk a little bit about the thing that you really have to do first in order to go tell other people what to do with our products, or go tell our suppliers how to operate their facilities. Really had to look inside ourselves, and that's why we started with some internal targets. So Steve mentioned that we set some goals. There's a lot to setting goals for environmental improvement. First, you got to go figure out, if you're going to set targets, you got to measure things. We have over 460 sites worldwide. So it's no small task to go figure out how to measure your impact and what are the biggest impact areas as far as the Boeing Company is concerned. These are the areas. So obviously energy, we're very energy intense as you make airplanes. Even office buildings, laboratories, just like you have here, they can be very energy intensive. Water is a big issue. Water is a little bit different than energy in that water is specific to a locale. Greenhouse gas, of course, follows the energy. And landfill, waste to landfill. I'm going to get into some of our great accomplishments, incredible accomplishments here at Charleston, once you get people working together and engaged around the environment. This is the top view of our Charleston Final Assembly facility. So we are incredibly proud of this. It's the very first Boeing facility that has 100% renewable energy across the site, 100%. Now the basis for that, the really big piece of that, is this photovoltaic grid that sits on the top of our final assembly building out there. How many of you had a chance to go out? Good, good, good. So the goal would be for you all to be able to get out there. We don't own that grid. South Carolina Gas and Electric owns the grid, and they put it on top of our rooftop, and they're generating power, and we're buying it from them. So we said, hey, we are going to be building the most environmentally friendly, or environmentally progressive, remember, there's still an impact to the environment, but most progressive product, airplane in the world, out of that factory. We want to make sure the factory is something special too. And by the way, we did not add any budget. We didn't say, Charleston, you get more money because we want to buy green power. We figured out a way in partnership with South Carolina Gas and Electric to do it at the same overall life cycle cost that we would have done had we just gone on a normal energy contract. So this notion of sustainability, you cannot be environmentally sustainable if you are not economically sustainable. So the two are, that you cannot separate the two because of that sustainability key. So something very important in your School of Business, folks. Anybody here from the School of Business? You there? Yes, very good. Ron's here. Remember that, those of you in the environmental sciences or environmental studies program and elsewhere, go make friends with your business partners over there because they'll help you. They'll help you sell all these ideas and make them sustainable. One I'm really excited about is there is zero waste to landfill at this facility. Zero waste to landfill. Now, that happened to be getting with the waste handling recycler and saying, again, we don't want to send any waste to landfill. Let's work together and figure out how we do this. And together we accomplished that. Moving on to, let's move backwards now. So lots of work there. We can, if you're interested in any more, we'll talk about it. You can also get on our external webpage, and the whole environment report, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I call it, is all up there for you to review. So we go into our supply base, and of course, we are not interested in going out to our 30 to 50,000 suppliers and setting a scorecard for them that then they have to spend money to send us their report, and then I have to go put a big group of auditors together. I mean, that's kind of counterproductive and too costly. So we work with them. We work with them and show them tools, give them tools about how they can work on their energy. We put procurement language specifically into all of our procurements that say, not only are we expecting you and those successful bidders have to meet our price requirements, you have to meet our quality requirements, you have to meet our schedule requirements, and oh, by the way, you have to meet our environmental requirements. Now, we also have a group that already goes out, as you can imagine. The suppliers are very important to us. We have them all over the world. We already have a quality organization that sits out there and is helping the suppliers and checking constantly on quality. And of course, I fly all the time, so I'm really happy about that. And making sure that everything meets our rigorous codes. We took those same folks and gave them some training, and now they're looking, as they go out in the factories, for environmental performance and making sure that they're seeing good environmental management practices out in our supply base. So just kind of taking the processes that you have and the people that you have and the business that you have and teaching everybody to kind of have eyes wide open and a little broader spectrum. Let's then, one of my favorite subjects is remediation. So given all of our practices, we have, as I said, a number of heritage companies. So Boeing and McDonnell Douglas merged a few years back. We have Hughes Aircraft, who's part of us now in the satellite piece. We have a number of others, Rockwell and things. And in the past, you know, we knew what we knew in the 30s, 40s, and the 50s about what good, sound environmental practices were then versus what we know now. So we have a lot of remediation sites. In fact, we spend $100 million per year remediating sites that we either had operated in the past and need to clean up, or we sent waste to, and those waste operators did not handle the waste properly for a number of reasons. So we are now using a lot of the Mother Nature's tools to go out and remediate those sites, and it's really phenomenal stories. Using, we have this group called Greener Remediation Team, and believe me, the whole industry is working on that. So those of you who are in the environmental studies program out of the geology department, we had a discussion yesterday, maybe it was the day before, it's all worrying together, with Tim and Mitch about some of the opportunities in remediation and directly. And of course, we really need the biologists and the chemists helping us with what we inject into the places that we can't see, and how we use maybe byproducts of, up in Seattle, we're using some byproducts from the Jones Soda Company, which is a local soda company, and in using that to inject in those bugs to kind of remediate some of our contaminants. And so it's very cool. Instead of digging it all up and putting in really environmentally impactful processing plants. And again, I can talk a long time, so we'll keep moving. All right, let's get to in-service. I mentioned to you that by far our biggest impact is those airplanes we build on behalf of the world. So we are 2% of the world's CO2 emissions in the aviation industry. Boeing has more than 50% of the installed base, right? So more than 50% of the airplane emissions out in the world are for Boeing products, which would say that the Boeing company's products are responsible for over 1% of CO2 emissions worldwide. That's a pretty big deal, right? So our goal is to grow that with a carbon neutral approach. And of course, we can't do it by ourselves. We're working with the entire aerospace industry to do that. Now, how do you do that? How do you do that in 3 ways? And this is really kind of complicated, and I don't have time to go through it, but imagine a place where you want carbon neutral growth, right? We want to double, basically, by 2030, the number of airplanes out there flying. You know why? Because people need airplanes for economic development and growth. They want to travel. But we have to do it in a way that caps the environmental footprint of those, that aviation. So 3 ways. Continuously improve the platform, the airplane itself. We have great opportunity there and great performance. I'll talk about that. The system that the airplane flies in. So when you're flying in and out of Charleston, you can do a continuous descent there. And any pilots in here? Well, trust me, I'm not a pilot, but this is true. You can get on a descent path where you use 0 fuel, because if you look at the aerodynamics of flight, there is a fuel neutral position that glides you right down to land. So think about being able to do that. It's worth 13% of all emissions for aviation. So a huge opportunity in the overall air traffic management system. So working there. The last thing is biofuels. Sustainable biofuels for aviation. So drop in a new fuel that has a lower carbon footprint than those from petroleum-based. And we're working in all those areas. I mentioned over the years, this is what our improvement has been from the 707 days, the very first commercial jetliners. Great, we're not standing on our laurels. Here's where we're at with the 787. So that airplane coming out of Charleston is 20% more fuel efficient than the airplanes it will replace in the fleet. We have a new 747-800, about 16%. We work on new platforms. There are billions and tens of billions of dollars to launch, but we also look at our other airplanes and we continuously improve those. So I saw a C-17 out, Barney and Jen and I were out yesterday. We saw a C-17 landing, and they have these winglets coming out. That's worth 3 to 4% fuel efficiency just by adding winglets to existing airplanes. So we're doing those kinds of things as well. I mentioned the flight path already, working in the air traffic management system. Just taking the kind of technology that's in your cell phone today and putting it and making it available so it's there, and harmonizing that around the world in air traffic management systems through satellites, 13% improvement. Biofuels, great opportunity. We never use the term biofuel without saying sustainable. It'll be a very long time before you can electrify aircraft. So aviation biofuels plays a particularly important place in aviation. And algae is our kind of nirvana. If we could use all algae and scale it up, think of the benefits. And finally, end of our service. So we're spending a lot of time helping our engineers think about, as they design the product, how are we going to recycle the materials? How are we going to move them back into the cradle to cradle? So we do a lot of that with carbon fiber. We send them to somebody else's cradle right now, like surfboards and those sorts of things out of our plant in Charleston. But one really cool thing, and I know that you all are, your procurement group are working with this, a carpet company called Interface. So Interface is here in the South, and they came to us and said, we know how to completely recycle aircraft carpet. And so you recycle the carpet and it goes back into aircraft carpet. Okay, the definition of cradle to cradle. So we're able to do that with them. We are now using, in a 787, or a 777, there's something like 17 tons of carpet, 20 tons of carpet from one 777 in its lifetime goes into the landfill. It has to be flame retardant because, of course, we don't want things going up in flames when there's some kind of an issue in the airplane. Flame retardants keep things from biodegrading, so they're going to be there a long, long time. Interface has figured out how to meet all of our standards and recycle the carpet and put it in squares. And I know you're doing this too, because I was talking to your procurement leader. Put it in squares so that now, instead of having an airplane on the ground where you have to take the seats up to rip the carpet out, put new carpet in, you can go take those wine stains or whatever out of specific places and just in a quick maintenance cycle, pull them up, put them back down again. It's a great new business opportunity. It's great for the airlines. It's great for Interface, and it's great for the environment. So this is what we mean, and we're making progress. This is 5 years down the road. We have a whole huge long way to go, but we're proud of where we're at, and we got to just continue on the journey. A huge part of this is transparency, and so we have done a much better job than what aerospace people don't like to talk outside aerospace. We like to think of ourselves as really special. You know, we want all these exemptions. After all, we're sending people to the moon and flying people up in the air, so leave us alone. At this point, the industry knows that we must grow sustainably, and we're working and reaching out, and we must be transparent about our efforts. So, quick recap of what we're doing.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate it. How does this turn on here? Okay. Nope. Still nothing.
Oh, I can hear it.
You can hear it? Can everybody hear that? Okay. Thanks, Mary. One of the questions I'm going to ask when I moderate is going to be about change. How do we create change? And I think we were given the first, piece of that in real life, tangible ways. We can see how we've begun to see change, and I think the Boeing company represents change in a relatively rapid fashion. So I'm really happy that Mary brought that out, and it was kind of the core of this. But now I'm going to shift over to our other panelists, and they're going to do a self-introduction, talk a little bit about 5 minutes of what they're doing here in and around the Charleston area, so we can maybe bring this conversation together. Hope.
Hi, I'm Hope Strode. I'm actually very new to the Charleston area. I moved here last August, so I haven't yet done that much work here, but I have done a fair amount of work elsewhere. I've been in the architecture industry for 10 years, and when I came to architecture, when I went to study, I had to go to Oregon, where everybody, where radical is basically normal, in order to get an education in architecture that had a really strong focus on sustainability. And from Oregon, I went on and was director of sustainability at a firm in Boston, where we have authored sustainability guidelines for a town in Massachusetts that at the time, and perhaps still now, but hopefully not, They were the most forward-thinking sustainability guidelines for any sort of development of that type. We've done net zero energy projects, a lot like what Boeing is talking about, on a variety of scales, from residential to small classroom, institutional type buildings to larger science and technology buildings for schools. So there's a lot that's going on in the field of architecture that we have to look forward to. But there's a lot that's working against us. I think we, right now, are working on a building philosophy that's rooted in 100 years of dependence on very abundant and very affordable fossil fuels. So we're designing our buildings without any sense of site, climate, future use. We're basically designing something that's built for the bottom line. And that's not just right now, but that's how we've been designing. And that's how we're sort of trained to think, both us as architects, the builders, the clients, the cities, the regulation. Everything right now is sort of stuck in those last 100 years where we've been developing under this sort of umbrella of cheap oil or cheap fuel and abundant fuel. So we have a lot to move beyond, and we're right at the cusp of this paradigm shift away from this dependence on fuel and away from this one-size-fits-all attitude. I think right now we're designing buildings that could be in Charleston, they could be in Boston, they could be in Australia. They could be anywhere in the world. We're designing the same building. And if you think about how we would dress for a Charleston winter, for example, versus a Boston winter, it's completely different. But we're not approaching our buildings in that same way. So we're building this one-size-fits-all building, and then we're depending on a huge amount of engineering sort of systems to make up the difference. So you're looking at spending buildings in the United States, for example, produce 39% of the carbon CO2 emissions. They use 40% of our energy, and we're using about 13% of water. So right now, buildings are a huge problem within this country. And that's not just buildings that we're building right now, that's buildings that have been built 100, 200 years ago. I mean, it's everything that we're dealing with. We also have a big problem with transportation and development. It's been so easy to just expand to new land and build new rather than building what we actually have here as a very valuable sort of resource. And if we continue to expand, more building materials, more transportation. Our roads right now are sort of growing and out of control. So we have a lot of issues to deal with, and Charleston is actually a really interesting place to start to look at those issues, because Charleston does have such a strong city core. It has all these basic services. The college is perfectly situated, I think, to really start to make a big difference in this place. There is a shift towards sustainability. Right now, clients are asking for sustainability, and architects are wanting to deliver sustainability. Builders are talking about how they're reducing waste going to a landfill. But it's still this attitude, and this isn't every project, but I think in general, it's still this attitude of solve it with engineering, add more systems, add more efficient systems. And I think it has to be bigger than that. We have to look at how we live our lives. We have to consider big pictures of development. We also have to look at how we build the building. If we approach it just from a technology, if we just say, okay, this building we need to cover it in solar panels, nobody's going to be able to afford to do the project. But if we start by reducing our energy need and then supplementing with solar panels or any other sort of alternative system, we can reach it. And it's a much less expensive approach and a much more sustainable approach. The other thing we need to look at is is longevity. We're building buildings right now that are obsolete, almost obsolete by the time they're completed. And if you look at natural or resources, materials, it's not really an effective way to build. So designing for flexibility, designing for future use, reusing what we have, making everything more energy efficient, and really reconsidering how we do that and not just throwing brute force systems at it is the place to start. So,
Excellent.
but I've
Susan?
gone too long.
No, not too long at all, because I'm going to build on what you were talking about. I'm Susan Collins, and I'm Chief Operating Officer for a company called Whole Building Systems, and it's a local energy efficiency and engineering consulting company here in Charleston. And really the reason that we came to be is for the very reason that Hope was talking about, which is that there are a lot of buildings in cities across the United States that are incredibly inefficient. The company was started about a year and a half ago by Dennis Knight, and he's a local engineer. He's got 37 years of experience in construction and design and energy efficiency, and has probably been in just about every building in Charleston. And myself, and my background is consumer marketing and marketing research and new product development. And Dennis and I started working together back in 2007. We were both volunteers for the Charleston Green Committee, and we were working on putting together the Charleston Green Plan. And Dennis headed up the Building Subcommittee, and I was the chair of the Education Subcommittee. And we started to talk about energy efficiency in buildings, because to Hope's point, that is really kind of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, if we can really tackle the issue with buildings from an efficiency standpoint, we're going to be going after the right target first. And so we started to talk about it, and we wanted to look at a building more holistically, and not just kind of the systems that are in the buildings and the processes by which you use the systems or operate the systems, but clearly they're important. But also the occupants of the building and what their behavior is, what the culture of the organization is. Do they even really care about energy efficiency? And if they don't, would they care if they were more educated? Are there ways that we can motivate people to care about energy efficiency? So there was a lot as it related to not just the building envelope and the windows and the doors and is it leaking. There was this whole component of nobody's really kind of taking a look at what's happening with the people in the buildings. And I'm sure all of us have been in a situation where you're in a conference room and you're sitting, or you're freezing, and you can hear the air conditioning coming on and off, and and you're just not going to be that productive. I was telling Hamilton that yesterday we went out and did an audit in a real estate agent office in Mount Pleasant. And as we were looking at all the systems and crawling around in the attic and taking all the notes, and then we went to talk to the individual folks in the building, and went into the first couple of offices, and they were unhappy with the temperature in the building, and came to find out that all of them had heaters underneath the desk and a full standing air conditioning unit next to their desk. So, not only was the system supposedly running the building, but they all had their own unique environments in each office. So, and the office that we kind of took over for the day, we had the plans on the floors and everything. By the end of the day, it was stifling. I mean, it was just, and they're spending over $450 a square foot in energy bills per year. So, I mean, and that's a bad number. So, there's a lot of opportunity to make people more comfortable, to help them become more productive, to get them on board with energy efficiency. And that's kind of what our company is going to look to do moving forward. And there's some interesting ways to get at that, but I wrote that down as a question, so I'm not gonna answer that right now, and I'll let Hamilton talk.
Good morning. My name is Hamilton Davis. I'm the Energy and Climate Director for the Coastal Conservation League. We're headquartered here in Charleston, and I share Brian's enthusiasm about this panel and what the College of Charleston's been doing these last couple of weeks in terms of bringing awareness to these issues. That certainly the college has a role in promoting some of this change in the community, But equally excited about just these collaborative efforts. We've got 3 people up here in the private sector doing important work that complements the work we do as a nonprofit organization. And it's always good to see a company like Boeing, especially, a leader in the world, explaining how renewable energy and energy efficiency and sustainability makes sense from a business perspective. Certainly in South Carolina, we have a challenge in that climate change is not much of a motivator. Environmental issues a lot of times are not much of a motivator. So when you're talking about energy, it can't just be about climate. It can't just be about the environment. It's also got to be about economics and about businesses and how changes we make are going to affect the economy of the state. And so some of what I want to cover quickly is kind of a high-level overview of what the potential we do have in this state as it relates to renewable energy and energy efficiency from an economic perspective. South Carolina right now imports 97% of the resources we use to produce electricity from out of our borders. It's uranium coming from Canada and Eastern Europe. It's coal coming from Kentucky, West Virginia, South America. It's natural gas coming from the Gulf of Mexico. And all of that translates into jobs and dollars that we're essentially just putting on a conveyor belt and sending out of the state. It would be one thing if we didn't have options, but we have options with energy efficiency and renewable energy to change that equation in a material way. Looking at things like energy efficiency, which has been pointed out, should be the first thing we pay attention to. There's been a number of studies recently in South Carolina that have taken a close look at what our potential is, and it's dramatic, in the range of, if we adopted a series of policies that other states have adopted around the country, we could look to create upwards of 20,000 jobs, avoid about $5 billion in energy expenses over the next 10 to 15 years. That's significant, and those kind of numbers are certainly raising the eyebrows of our elected officials, and we're starting to see movement. We've adopted new building codes in the state that require new commercial and residential buildings to be much more energy efficient. Those adoptions in recent years translate into about 1,800 megawatts of demand that we don't need. That's the equivalent of almost the 2 nuclear reactors that SCNG has planned in Northern Columbia today. We've got local programs like Charleston Wise that the Sustainability Institute is working on, where residents now have access to contractors, to incentives, and really a simplified way to have an audit done, energy audit done of their home, and then have their home retrofitted, and do it in a way that makes good economic sense. And then we see our utilities beginning to invest a significant amount of money and attention towards energy efficiency that we've never seen in the state before, and we haven't seen in much of the Southeast. Duke Energy, with their Save a Watt program, is leading the Southeast in projected energy reduction over the next decade or so. We're seeing good programs from SCE&G and also from Progress. Our electric cooperatives have proposed an aggressive energy efficiency retrofit initiative. They plan to retrofit over 200,000 homes in the next 10 years. That's going to translate into about 800 megawatts of demand that is no longer needed, and they estimate it's going to create somewhere in the range of 5,000 to 7,000 jobs. So good stuff's happening, but there are lots of policies that we can implement. There are ways to provide access to businesses and homeowners with the capital they need to make some of these changes and have it pay back in a way that certainly makes sense from an economic perspective. We also have incredible amounts of renewable energy potential in the state. Wind energy being probably the most abundant and most obvious. If you've been paying attention to what's happening in places like North Charleston and the old Navy base, you see the Clemson Restoration Institute and their construction of a one-of-a-kind wind turbine test facility that will literally be unique in the world and will be testing the next generation of offshore wind turbines. Now that facility complements a supply chain that already exists in the state. We've got GE and Bosch and Timken, KDON, IMO, this whole list of industrial suppliers to the land-based wind industry. So South Carolina's in this unique position where we can grow that base, take advantage of facilities like the Clemson Restoration Institute's new test facility, and then also look off our shore and see that we've got the second largest offshore wind resource on the East Coast. We also have the ports, we've got the labor markets. It's a perfect storm for wind to be a growth market in this state, for us to take advantage of an indigenous energy source and create an industry that potentially serves the East Coast. The U.S. Department of Energy has looked at South Carolina and said, if we're actually to capture a significant share of the growth of this industry as we see it over the next decade, we could have 10 to 20,000 jobs and $80 billion in revenue as a consequence in the next 20 years. So these are huge numbers, huge opportunities. But we're not going to do any of this without some type of comprehensive vision, without taking a hard look at the policies that are in place that right now are impediments to a lot of this investment. North of our border, North Carolina is now top 10 in the country in installed solar capacity. South Carolina's at the very far end. Yet we've got a better solar resource in South Carolina than they have in North Carolina. We have the same utilities, Duke and Progress in South Carolina, that they have in North Carolina. But North Carolina's made the policy tweaks that have not translated into skyrocketing electricity bills. It's just translated into investment and job growth and access to a clean energy technology that we ought to be taking advantage of in South Carolina too. And so the opportunity with this discussion beginning in Charleston, with the College of Charleston becoming more active, with businesses like Boeing, whole building systems, architects, nonprofits coming together, having these conversations, and beginning to communicate in a more effective way with the Chamber of Commerce, with City Council, with County Council, with our state legislators, with our utilities. That's the kind of effort it's going to take to see the changes that we absolutely should be making, that make sense from an environmental perspective, from an economic perspective. And I'm looking forward to participating in that. I hope you guys are getting energized and looking at ways that you can get involved in the conversation. And looking forward to the rest of this panel discussion also. Thank you.
Thanks, Hamilton. Now you can see why I'm excited. This panel brings a diverse body of knowledge and understanding. Speak up. Yeah, I think it's this microphone. Can you hear me now? Better? No? Still? Good?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
This is really exciting to bring this kind of diversity to a panel, and I think we're excited as panelists to be a part of such a diverse group, because we don't really do it all that much. And so I think the more times we can do this, the more diverse, the more opportunity we'll be able to, the better the potential for us to take advantage of these opportunities. I was thinking about a question that I really need to ask, and I'm going to use my discretion as kind of the moderator to ask it, and you already know it's coming. I think it's really important that Mary, as she's retired and spent so many years at Boeing, at least provide some maybe challenges, limitations, and lessons learned from being a woman in the workforce. And there's lots of lessons and maybe insights that you would have for our staff and our female students. So if you could maybe just briefly talk to that.
Yeah, I'm
point.
sure that
And other
got a couple of
panelists.
panelists
Yep,
here.
Absolutely.
Well, it's always thrilling to see a group in front of me that looks almost 50-50 in terms of gender. So when I joined Boeing, and I'm an engineer, I was frequently the only female in the room for a long time. And I can say that, it's okay, I used to play soccer with the boys on the field when I was in, elementary school. But, so I was somewhat comfortable, but there's a lot of women who aren't. And I think developing networks of other females in the workforce where you are maybe not as prevalent as men. At Boeing, we have 25% female, 75% men today. Now, of course, we have nearly 40 to 50,000 employees who make the airplanes, and because in most of our operations they're heavily unionized, and that's a seniority-based system. So by definition, that system is going to, most of the time, have a gender on bias towards men for another many years.
So there are some reasons for it. Also in engineering, the engineering schools typically only have about a 25, if they're lucky, % women, and we have a lot of engineers. So there are some reasons because of the kind of corporation we are, but it's really great today because there's a lot of networks for women to get together and feel more like they feel comfortable in the workforce. So lots of my recommendations to those of you who find yourself maybe joining a workforce that doesn't look a lot like you is to find those folks, get some mentors, some females that you feel comfortable with talking about, hey, how do you balance all this stuff? And balancing family and that sort of thing. And my husband and I have a yours, mine, and ours family, but we have 5 boys. And so how do you do that and travel and all that sort of thing? So there's a lot of folks out there who are struggling with the same things. And so together you'll figure out what some of your options are and make choices that I think support yourself very well. But I can't tell you what a great career I have had. And yes, you can't do everything. I didn't join a lot of affiliations, so I would be very efficient at work. I'm kind of an efficiency Nazi. And so that when I went home at night, I didn't work on my computer. And before we had computers, of course, that made it even easier. I didn't have to stay that late. And I think you make your choices and you set your goals. As I tell a lot of the folks at Boeing is never going to say to you, gee, I think, Mary, you have worked enough today, and I think you should, take the rest of the day off. Boeing is not going to do that. You have to do that for yourself and set your goals and your ground rules. So I hope that helps a little bit. If there's any more questions, I'd be happy. Specific questions.
Susan.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I actually am here in Charleston and kind of was able to have a second career in energy efficiency is because I started out doing marketing and new product launches and was one of the executives who launched DirecTV, the satellite service, and then went to work for Richard Branson and launched a mobile telephone service here in the United States. And so, I had a lot of similar experiences to Mary. I sat around a lot of corporate boardrooms, and if there was another woman in the room, I was like, oh, good, But the thing that I found throughout my career is if I was really interested in what I was doing, if I was really passionate about it, and I wasn't afraid to ask questions and kind of put myself out there, generally you get a good response to that. If you are going to kind of pull back and kind of not get involved and not put your 2 cents in, and you're not going to get that kind of feedback and input back. And so it doesn't mean you need to be slamming your fist on the table and saying this is what I think, but you do need to be a part of the discussion, and your thoughts need to be heard. And most times you'll get a good response to that. So I would say, be yourself, pick something that you're passionate about. I was lucky enough to be able to kind of have enough time to go back and figure out what I wanted to do, and what I wanted to do was kind of preservation, historic preservation, and art and architecture and the environment. And for me now, I was able to go back and get a master's in preservation and to work on the Green Committee and to start doing energy efficiency in historic buildings, which is one of the things that Whole Building Systems focuses on. And so I've been able to combine things, and it just, if you're happy and you're focusing on something that's really interesting to you, you're going to be comfortable in that space. And I think that's important. If you're comfortable, you're going to make other people feel comfortable, men, women, whoever. So that would be my advice.
I'll be quick, but when I graduated from architecture school, 9% of the registered architects were female. My graduating class was 60% women. So I think that this whole industry is shifting dramatically, and that as a woman, and maybe I'm young and still a little bit naive, but at this point, I don't feel really any difference. I feel like, sure, I'll go into a meeting and I'm the youngest person there and the only female, but having the background and sort of understanding what you're talking about and being passionate in it, and I think I don't feel
Good.
like it matters. And maybe that's the next generation, and it's going to be even easier for people graduating today. And certainly different areas come with different challenges, but I think we're certainly moving in the right direction.
Fantastic. Thank you for those insights.
You don't want
let's-
Hamilton to answer.
Yeah, Hamilton. we have a lot of other things that we can, I think, join in the discussion. But in the interest of transparency, I think it is important to talk about greenhouse gas emissions, not ignore that part of the equation. And in the interest of transparency, I'd like to at least mention our greenhouse gas footprint, which we're coming out with a report here in the next few weeks. And it is important to note that the College of Charleston's footprint from a greenhouse gas perspective is larger than at least 12 countries in the world. So it does put it in some form of perspective relative to the rest of the world. And we really don't manufacture anything. Of course, we produce things, but the most energy-intensive aspects are where you manufacture. So I think it's important that we utilize greenhouse gas emissions as a metric. It's not the end-all, be-all, but it's an important metric for us to begin to monitor our progress. And I would eventually love to sit up here and say we have a footprint smaller than any country in the world. And I think that's a really tangible goal that we can set here at the College of Charleston to help move this forward. So I look at emissions as just an important way to create a metric for us as an institution moving forward. That then brings us to this idea of social change, and how is it that we all, and I think all of us, can have a role in answering that. And I've got a couple questions amongst, even including your own, around social change, and particularly messaging. What is it, can you talk in each of your individual fields maybe about the challenges to seeing this go a step further, particularly how do we get to that medium and higher hanging fruit that we all are kind of aware of, but yet are struggling to kind of get to? So maybe talking about that, and what message do we want to send? Maybe we'll start with Hamilton, just because I know this is right in your wheelhouse.
Oh,
Yes, I mean, I think obviously from my comments earlier, one of the messages we try to send is that this makes economic sense, and there are economic opportunities related to making some of these changes. You know, a company like Boeing is a much better messenger on greenhouse gases and climate change, ironically, probably, than an environmental group. I mean, when we come to the table with that as a motivator, I think a lot of people shut down. And so what we've attempted to do is work with solar businesses within the wind industry, biomass, energy efficiency, and understand what those business models are and what they need in terms of policy changes to be successful, and then attempting to communicate that and partnering with those interests when we work with legislators or regulators, et cetera. So I'm encouraged when I hear a company like Boeing talk about climate change. And I think the college can play a real role in talking about climate change as a motivator for some of these changes. But ultimately, we're going to have to be able to explain why these changes or adopting some of these policies make sense from an economic perspective. And so understanding the interplay between those two things is critical, and being able to convey it in a coherent and convincing way is critical also.
So framing these issues is critical to being able to then message them, to send it in.
I mean, I think just the idea that we don't get any of our energy resources from this state, with the exception of a very little bit of hydro and biomass, that we're wasting all of this energy and translating that. What does that mean in terms of actual dollars and jobs that we're just giving up? That if that's not a motivator for our elected officials, then I don't know what it is.
Yeah, real quickly, I mean, I mentioned this a lot about the power of local. I mean, for every dollar that stays here, that dollar spent on average 7 to 8 times in the local economy. For every dollar that leaves, we only retain a fraction of that dollar. So it's extraordinarily important. It's not just about energy, it's about mixing this kind of energy and thinking in terms of smart grid or smart growth and how they kind of fit together for us to think about these things, not just in terms of technology or energy, but in terms of what makes good business sense and what builds our local economy. So I think these are really important steps forward. Susan?
Well, kind of drawing on my marketing background, I always look at messaging as, well, who are you talking to? Because if you don't know who the audience is, you really, you could say something to them, it could be true, it could be important, but if it's not important to them, it's not going to resonate with them. So for instance, we have a large industrial client who, it's a European company, and they're very focused on greenhouse gas emission reduction. And so for them, it isn't as important how much they spend, on the technology as it is to get those emission reductions. So that's one group with a certain motivation. If you start talking to consumers about greenhouse gas emissions, they're like, what? Greenhouse gas emissions, I can't influence, So they don't get it. But if you talk to them about, well, what about being comfortable, or not being freezing cold, or not being overlit so that things are glaring back at you, those are the kinds of messages that resonate with them. Elected officials have different messages that resonate with them. So I think it's a matter of crafting, understanding who we want to influence as a group moving forward, and how we target the correct messages to the correct group of people. It was interesting here in Charleston because when we put the Charleston Green Plan together, we actually ended up getting about 800 volunteers throughout the city to come and to help and to write and to provide input into the plan, and we thought we were being extremely collaborative and getting everybody together. But when the plan came to the City Council for adoption, there were folks out there who were not happy that a sustainability plan was being put in front of the City Council, because there's still enough people out there who question whether there is a climate change issue. And so, I think, whether you agree with climate change or you don't, I say to people, I am not a scientist and I don't know, but, I think that when it comes to energy efficiency, I think that we have a responsibility to be more energy efficient. I think if we're more energy efficient, it's going to be more environmentally friendly. And those are the things that we can focus on that potentially motivate people. And so we should try to work our messages so that we're not talking over people or just stuff that isn't relevant to them.
Well, I think that there's also the issue of cost. And if we can see it as something that isn't necessarily going to cost any more, and in the end is going to cost less to operate, then it just makes good sense. And it doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or if you don't. There's a situation where my in-laws, well, I don't know what they are, my husband's uncles don't believe in climate change. And we had to get there, and we didn't have a car at the time. We commuted by bicycle, so we rented a Prius and we drove to this Thanksgiving gathering. And we arrived and everyone gave us a hard time for driving a Prius. Oh, you're such tree huggers and you're so concerned about the environment and climate change isn't real. But it cost us half as much to drive there. Doesn't that just make sense? So when they saw it that way, sure, it makes a lot of sense. So I think that if we understand that this question is about design, it's about how we can work within a framework to deliver something, how we can reconsider how we approach these problems of building and design so that we do it without tripling our budget and still produce something that works just as well, works well in the future, doesn't cost as much to operate, then we're going to get somewhere.
I think they've covered this. You got to be relevant to your audience, got to be relevant to whoever you're trying to sell to, and hit things that hook them and show them there's something in it for them. I think they did a great job of explaining that.
Yeah, I would add to that one element about cost. Andy Feltz and I always talk about the idea of sustainability, what it means, and we really have stressed the idea of time. There's a time element to sustainability. You have to be sustainable relative to something else. And that time element is really critical when you talk about cost. So for example, putting solar panels, and I talked about this at breakfast, putting solar panels on a house that really isn't all that's built without resiliency, that when a Cat 2 comes through here and wipes it out, that's not really sustainable, because your trade-off or your payback on those solar panels could be, if you bought them yourself, could be 12 to 15 years. And so that was a very bad investment of your money. And I think that's a critical component of why I agree with Mary that you have to be economically sound and sustainable in order to think about environmental sustainability. But I wouldn't say they're necessarily a cause and effect, or one's a precursor. I would say they have to be thought about together in this element of time. Really, really critical feature of thinking about cost. And that's why I think architecture and design is really a fundamental portion of what it is we're talking about here. That we can't just talk about it, think about it, we have to do it. In order to do it, we have to build it. In order to build it, we've got to think about it. So very, very critical questions. So I'm going to turn a little bit here into the fuel side of things, because a lot of questions are around fuels. And maybe we can think about this in terms of how we can think about energy in our residences, energy use in our homes, energy in transportation, and maybe energy in policy. What kind of other alternative forms of energy do you envision, particularly around fuels? There's a lot of question around fuels.
Biofuels.
Yeah, biofuels for airplanes, but I think we can expand it into what kind of energy we can see in these different areas, and maybe some of the challenges.
Shall I start with that?
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so I kind of peeked over here to some of the questions. So whenever I give this presentation, most of the questions are around biofuels, because it just seems to be such a interesting and hopeful solution. So I mentioned that it'll be a long time before we electrify airplanes. Now, we're working on it, but it'll be a lot longer than what we can already do in electrifying ground transportation. So where you can do that and be able to afford it, it depends. But on the airplane side, the biofuels, this has been an amazing story. It's kind of where there's a will, there's a way. And a couple years even into my job, I was in Illinois at a Chamber of Commerce or something, and a man came up to me from Illinois and said, this biofuel, aviation biofuels, this is really not true. It's really just a gimmick, isn't it? And I smiling to myself, I said, actually, no, it's true. And now you can actually fly on commercial flights today where they're using sustainable aviation biofuel. Now, it's not many flights, but we've done a lot of testing, and in fact, the performance of the biofuels, the aviation biofuels, is better than the jet fuel that it's replacing. So some of the great things that we've discovered together. Boeing is not a fuel maker. So who do we have to get kind of, together with? Agriculture. We know nothing about agriculture. Gets back to this, we have to work these problems together. And so agriculture, the fuel folks, and big oil here is not the bad guy, because there's a lot of stuff they know about. So I think we're looking at second generation biofuels now that come out of camelina, jatropha. It depends on what hemisphere you're in as to which ones are sustainable. It's a great opportunity for underdeveloped countries and for women in particular, in terms of these are very small relative to refineries, oil refineries. These are units that can be very customized and local to local feedstocks, and it'll depend on where in the world you are. Algae is tremendously important to us, And this pond scum idea, right? Can you imagine, think about where pond scum, where you see it in some very unfriendly places, and think about reaping this very positive fuel with a very low, less than 50% of the impact that jet fuel has. So that takes chemists and biologists and marine biologists, and it takes processing people, and it takes agriculture and agronomists and all kinds of folks to put it together. And it is truly amazing what they've accomplished when you bring people together that have never really worked together before because they didn't have a reason to do so.
I guess I would say that, and I don't have the background in fuels, but one of the points that Hamilton made was, the ability to use solar here in South Carolina. I mean, it kind of seems like a no-brainer, but to everyone's point, it needs to be economically viable. And how do we do that? And I think part of it will be policy, which Hamilton would be much better suited to talk about. But the other way to approach it is to do a couple of demonstration projects and really demonstrate that it can work. And thanks to Boeing and others, we have some of those demonstration projects and we have some momentum. But we really need people behind the efforts. So we do need to come together as a community, because it can't just be the people who are in the private sector or the people who are in the nonprofits. It really has to be a community that comes together and says, these things are important to us. And whether it's the students from the College of Charleston or other institutions, it's the religious groups. It's a community effort to say, we get it. We think this is something that we need to be doing now, and we have a lot of momentum in Charleston, and there's a tremendous amount of work going on in Charleston, from the wind turbine testing facilities to the advances that the city has made, to the mayor creating the Charleston Green Team and having a document produced, to the South Carolina Energy Office spending time and effort in Charleston, to Brian's efforts to really kind of catalyze what's going on. There's a lot of people here who really are pretty excited about this and see the opportunity from the triple bottom line, not just about what's the right thing to do for the environment. It's the right thing to do economically for the region. And I think we're beginning to see that. I think Whole Building Systems is an example of that, that we're creating a company, and we're probably going to bring another employee on in the next couple of months, and there's a lot of opportunity. So, there is, I kind of got off the solar topic a little bit, but I guess what I'm saying is there is opportunity in South Carolina for alternative fuels, for renewables. And hopefully, if we can make some progress on the policy front, we'll begin to see that happen. But it's not going to happen without people getting behind it.
So, I think you started this conversation about what can we do different, or where can we get our fuels from in the future by being realistic and saying we're not going to shut down all our nuclear and our coal and our natural gas and just move to renewables in the foreseeable future. I don't think anybody's suggesting that, though I think some people get that in their minds when they start listening to these conversations. I don't think we're ever going to build another coal plant in South Carolina, but we are building the 2 new nuclear reactors right now, presumably. Natural gas costs are incredibly low, and that's the kind of fuel that offers a really nice complement to renewable energy with intermittency issues. We can ramp up natural gas and respond to those dips in production. And so the question is, let's look at offshore wind, look at biomass, look at solar, and figure out what is the role it can play. I guarantee you we can do 10 or 15% in the next 10 years, and it'd be reasonable from a cost perspective, and it'd have huge benefits from reduction of greenhouse gases as well as economic benefits to the state. You look around the country at renewable portfolio standards that have been adopted in, I think, 29 states today, and there's been numerous analyses done of what that's resulted in terms of ratepayer impact. and it is minimal. You look at North Carolina, they've got a 12.5% RPS. Compared to the last decade of increasing costs for things like coal, retrofits to coal plants and other facilities to control emissions, that's significantly more expensive than what their RPS is costing that state. We were talking about maybe $2 per month on your electricity bill for them to get to that 10.5% thus far. So there's no question that these fuels work. We have access to them. It's purely a policy question, and right now our utilities are making decisions based on a policy environment that encourages them to do things like nuclear and just nuclear. And we need to have an environment that's inclusive of these other resources that are available to us, so that if you're a homeowner, you can invest in solar and have it make sense. But if we don't have the right net metering policies, if we don't allow for some limited third-party sales that open up the door for interesting financing mechanisms, then you're not going to see it happen.
Yeah, I think we're hearing some themes at this point. How we message, frame these issues, how we're communicating these issues, all very important. How we learn, how we educate ourselves and others around these issues, very important. Starting to talk about technology, how do we integrate technology effectively? How does it make economic sense? How do we invest properly? I think from an individual perspective, from a regional perspective or Charlestonian perspective, I mean, these are really important questions, particularly around investment. For a final question, I really want you to maybe divert this a little bit toward the College of Charleston. What lessons do we need to learn from you all? And I'm particularly interested in Hope's perspective on this, particularly as an architect. And I'd like to direct it maybe a little bit more toward the educational side. I mean, what is it that we need to do here at the college to prepare students to handle these challenges that we're talking about? How do we help them solve these problems? Because our generation just isn't going to end up solving them. We can hopefully take it a step further. But what do we need to do from the College of Charleston's perspective to help these students solve those problems? Why are you passing, Mike? Mary?
Oh,
start.
Joe, I
Yeah,
thought, well,
all
let's
of you,
start
but I
with-
mean.
Let's start with Hope.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Okay.
I have my opinions, I'll get there.
Okay, all right.
Well, in terms of education, obviously we need our students, is this working? Can you hear me? We need our students to believe in these issues and to understand the complexity of them and understand how decisions that they make, not only in their personal lives, but say in what they're investing in how they're putting money into the college, how these decisions impact the environment. And I think you can't understand that without sort of a comprehensive education in environmental science. And I think it's also important to understand business. And if you have an understanding in business and you have an understanding in the environment, then it gives them the tools that they will need to make the appropriate decisions. I think the other thing that's important is for the college to really be an example of what can be done. I mean, you can talk about these things in theory, but until you see a project that is a beautiful project that people want to, a building that people want to be in, a building that everyone loves, a building that uses 70% less energy, that building that's more comfortable. So until there is that building that people can go to and see and really understand that it's possible to do, it's just going to be theory. And when it's just theory, it's really hard to stand behind it.
Let me add a couple of thoughts to what I think you can do.
Just a few?
Yeah, so it's all about being aware of things. And so as soon as you start putting information in front of the students, in front of you, and you all of a sudden see what you're using in terms of electricity, or how much paper you are consuming, or how much water you're consuming. So if you're metering things and you encourage competition between buildings, we do that at Boeing, and so people can say, wow, I had no idea that we were using this much. How come that building over there is doing better, and that team of people? And so there's lots of things to get people involved, but the key to it is these measurements. And John's over there, the facilities guy, saying, oh boy, I'm going to have to show where, the use of how things are used. And at the more individual or small group level. So things that we do at Boeing over recycling, we put information up that says for every plastic fork you use, instead of the metal fork that is going to be washed, you could wash 100,000 forks. This is how much you have reduced in your because of composting. So you make it more personal, and in every case it has to be measurable. So you got to get in there and put some measurements together, put a competition on, put a prize out there, get some things going in your Greek system, in your residence halls. There's a group that I'm on the board for that's a school in the woods for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And the first day they come in, they stay overnight for 4 days out in this beautiful location. First thing they do is they teach them about waste, the very fundamental waste. And so they all eat their food, and they're required to pour their food, whatever they didn't eat, onto a weigh scale. And that's the waste. And boy, as soon as they see that you're going to be measured that way, the next day, and then they plot it. And every single day, the waste that they don't eat, the food that they don't eat or waste, of course, it all goes to compost. But they can see, hey, I shouldn't be taking too much. I should only take as much as I need, and then I can always go back for more. So, believe me, as soon as they don't have to tell the students, they just see it, and then pretty soon their consumption habits change. So it's awareness.
So I think what we're all going to say, because I'm going to say the same thing, is that we need to be able to visualize it. And energy is hard to visualize, right? It's just tough. And then we need to be able to get people to engage in it. So even at the beginning of the presentations and everything, when Mary gave the example of, well, we're just going to replace one tiny little square of carpeting versus having however millions of tons of carpet in the landfill.
Tons, yeah.
That's very visual. That's a very visual example. So was the one that she gave with the kids. And when Brian said, the College of Charleston, and he's talking about greenhouse gas emissions, would anybody have had any idea how to compare that without him saying we have more greenhouse gas emissions than 13 countries? So those are the kinds of things that people come, oh, okay, I understand that. And then you want to try to engage them in it. From a visualization standpoint, I have one example, which is that I had to go in front of the City of Charleston. I helped them benchmark some buildings through the EPA's Portfolio Manager, which is a program that allows you to do what Mary was saying. You look at a whole group of buildings and you see who's performing, good and bad. And the chief of police happened to be the head of the committee that I was presenting to, and I had to kind of tell him that his building wasn't really doing all that well. So, but everybody at the table kind of, with one quick look, you kind of knew how you were stacked up. I didn't get into the fire stations because I just didn't want to go there. But then I think when we talk about college students and how to engage them, and there is one thing that is happening right now that's kind of interesting that we're doing a little research into, and it's called gamification. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's kind of taking the whole craze of everybody wanting to be in gaming, right? And putting that against things that aren't necessarily fun, right? Because usually when you think about doing something in a game, it's fun. You get rewards. You're competing with somebody, and So if you can take things that aren't necessarily fun per se and make them more fun, then you can engage people in it. And the example that was told to me that really kind of made me visualize it, and I clicked, was in Sweden they did something where they have a lot of people who are speeding, and so they set up the cameras to try and catch people, and they decided to make the penalty of speeding based on what you earned. So one gentleman, apparently a very wealthy gentleman, got a $250,000 speeding ticket. And then they, so that was helping, but they decided to take pictures of everybody. And if you weren't speeding, then you got entered into a lottery to win the money of the people who were speeding. And that had a big effect on people's behavior. It was a game.
The carrot.
Yeah, they knew it, and so all of a sudden people stopped speeding. So that's an example of gamification, and it's kind of one of those things that now, if we can translate that, and somebody said to me, you can't just take, energy efficiency and go, I want Angry Birds, because it doesn't work. You've got to do it correctly. But that's one area where, we want to look to see if there's a way to engage people more in energy efficiency.
Hamilton, can you wrap this up?
Yeah, so it's hard to add to what's been said. I'll just say, from my perspective, working on policy, I think there's an opportunity to take this kind of approach to develop some success stories at the college. As you're going through that process, recognize where your hurdles are, where your obstacles are. That I bet you are going to be related to policy, either through the utilities or through city government or through state government. And there are going to be ways to provide you guys with better access to more of what you'd like to do. And so think about how you can work with companies like Boeing, and then communicate to city council or communicate to a utility or any elected official state level why it makes sense to promote policy changes that are going to enable the college, but also enable businesses and individuals to take better advantage of the opportunities that are there, just hard to access in the current environment.
Excellent. That concludes the panel discussion, but hopefully this has become the beginning of a larger conversation here at the College of Charleston and with the larger community. I encourage everyone that's here to stick around. We're going to have a little bit of lunch. You can interact with the panelists a little bit more and ask more specific questions if you'd like. But let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.